sound. Dad was sound. Okay.
And today I want to start by just giving you three kind of what I think are models of parenting to start us out with. First of all, in your outlines, I want you to look at the absent parent. The absent parent, which I believe today, unfortunately, is epidemic because kids today, oftentimes, 40% in America of the kids today either lack a mom or a dad at home. And the epidemic is even more so when it's an absent mom or dad socially, emotionally, rather than just literally. But there are huge numbers of children who are being raised up in homes where either a parent is not there due to abandonment or divorce, or where the parents are there but aren't. You know what I mean by that? They are there but aren't. Oftentimes in our generation, because of the fact that you have two parents who are career-driven. In the 50s and 60s, women used to complain about the career-driven husband. Unfortunately, when you got to the 80s and 90s, rather than that excess being corrected, what happened was women joined that pursuit. And as we move into the 21st century, I think for a lot of young children growing up right here at the beginning of the 21st century, what we're going to find later on is that not only do a lot of children suffer from the absent father wound, but will also suffer in the next generation from the absent mother wound. Mom just wasn't there. But that's one style of parenting, the absent parent. On the other hand, there's some healthy things happening in our country today, and that's what I call the engaged parent. That's number two, engaged parenting, which I think represents a healthy new resurgent of parental involvement in children's lives that's occurring right now in our country, and that's good seeing moms and dads realize the importance of being close to their children, involved in their schoolwork, involved in their social relationships, attending their games, just being an overall part of their life, which gives weight to a child's life growing up. That's such a healthy thing, and it's so encouraging to see many children today get a new closeness of time and attention with mom and dad because they figured it out. They figured out that a kid just can't raise his or herself, that they need that closeness of proximity. They need time and attention to grow up healthy and whole. But I think there's a third kind of parenting, and quite frankly, I think the third type is the best type. I'm going to call it strategic parenting. It's a style of parenting that not only engages a son or daughter with time and attention, but also equips a son or daughter with the most important issues of life, so that when they go out in life, they go out confident about life. This week and next week, I want to address some specific ways a dad can be strategic with his son, and then next week, strategic with his daughter. And as you know, throughout men's fraternity, we have made one important point over and over again, and that is dad, for a child, is destiny. Dad's destiny. His presence or lack of it has no rival when it comes to shaping the formative beginnings of a child's life. For a son, dad is, and dad always will be, a powerful reality in a child's life. I like what country singer Kenny Loggins said not too long ago. He said this. He says, "Are we ever really free from the gravitational pull of the moon? Can a son ever stop needing his father's love? I don't think so. As I see it, this is simply emotional physics." And I tell you, when it comes to that incredible closeness between a father and son and what goes on there, there is some emotional physics that will occur that last for a lifetime. I think maybe some of us saw that a number of years ago in the life of the great basketball player Michael Jordan. As many of you know, during one of the seasons, championship seasons for the Chicago Bulls, Michael Jordan's dad was murdered tragically. And at the end of that year, as it came down to the end and the Bulls won another NBA championship, at the end of that game, Michael Jordan ran out on the court and grabbed the basketball and fell down in a fetal position. I don't know if you remember that. And began to sob uncontrollably. Now here was a guy who had it all. He had fame, he had money, he had superstardom. He had everything but what he wanted most in this moment. Because in this moment, as he hugged that ball and squeezed it tight, he was hoping he could squeeze out just one more moment with Dad. And I remember as he laid there on the court, and it kind of lingered, and after a while, it became awkward, even for the announcers, while everybody else was celebrating, seeing Michael Jordan down there in a fetal position on the court crying. One of the announcers finally kind of awkwardly said, well, obviously this is a private moment for Michael. And I thought to myself, no, it's not private. It's primal. This is emotional physics at work. This is a son wanting his dad and wanting to hear from his dad just one more time. Good job, Michael. But not being able to possess it. All he could possess in that moment was a basketball. You know, the scriptures are very clear about this emotional physics. In Proverbs 17:6, here's what it says. It says, the glory of sons is their fathers. And for a son, dad will always be this extremely powerful reality, whether he's conscious of it or not. It'll surface from time to time, though. Dad is always there. And as we've mentioned several times, every son needs to hear at least 3 things from his dad over his lifetime. To have, in a sense, that weight in his body from Dad. He needs to hear these 3 phrases. First of all, son, I love you. He needs to hear that verbally, specifically, face to face, eyeball to eyeball. He needs to hear from his dad, son, I'm proud of you. And he needs to hear from his dad, son, you're good at, and whatever he's good at, the blank needs to be filled in. He needs to feel that from Dad. I told you even Jesus needed that. As you go through the pages of the New Testament over the life of Jesus, there are 6 times God the Father breaks into time and space, and we hear His voice verbally speak to Jesus Christ. And it's interesting, on every one of those occasions, He says pretty much the same thing. He says to Jesus these words, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Listen to Him. And in that moment, we hear this affirmation, this commendation from a father to his son that's so desperately needed by the man, Jesus Christ. This is my beloved Son. I love you. In whom I am well pleased. I'm proud of you. Listen to Him, telling those around Him, because this man has something to say. He's good. Jesus Christ needed that, and if Jesus Christ needed that, how much more do fathers need to give that to their sons in this very difficult journey towards manhood? A strategic father, not just an engaged father, not one who just hangs around his son and attends his ball games and takes him on some hunting trips. All that is good stuff between a father and son, but it's not the most strategic stuff. Within those activities and that presence, there needs to be deposited specific and strategic thoughts, information, and empowerment that makes him be able to stand in the storm of life later on. And those 3 phrases are just part of that adventure of a strategic father who will speak those words often to his son. But you know what? A strategic dad will also do other things, and that's what we want to look at this morning. Important things, life-shaping things. I've listed them on your outline, as the three ingredients of strategic fatherhood. Ingredients that I think make a son healthy, confident, and clear in life. And I want to present these three ingredients using a metaphor, the metaphor of volleyball. Now, I'm not sure how many of you guys played volleyball. I never did, but except for just the recreational kinds of things. But you don't have to play volleyball very long to know that there are three key moves in volleyball. There is the dig. It's that person getting down the dirt to pull that ball up for his teammates. There is the set, where you set it up for the net. And then there's that other strategic move called the spike, where you jam it home and score the point. Strategic fatherhood, in some ways, can be compared to the game of volleyball around those three moves. I want to give them for you as definitions. First, for a dad, a strategic dad, the dig is dad's compelling character. Every son, listen guys, every son wants to be like his dad, at least for a time, until dad disappoints, until dad pulls back or pulls out. In the beginning, every son wants to be like his dad. And the dig is this. The dig is that you as a dad must have a life worth wanting. And that's hard, dirty work. That's not something that you can go out in a weekend seminar and get in a notebook. That's not something that just immediately happens. That's not some kind of phrase you can throw out to your son on occasion and he finally gets it. The dig is you getting down in the everyday dirt of life, the hard-edged, pressurized frenzy of the 21st century, and living in such a way that your life would be in some ways compelling to your son. He would look at you by the choices you make. He would look at you by the way you react and interact in certain specific situations. He would look at you and see how you handle certain moral dilemmas. And in those dirty digs, he would see a life worth wanting to emulate. A dig cannot be taught. A dig is character that's caught. A number of years ago, I read the following article in Reader's Digest that I think really illustrates this point called the dig. The article was entitled Catch of a Lifetime. Let me just read it to you and you'll get the point. It says, he was 11 years old and went fishing every chance he got from the dock at his father's cabin on the island in the middle of the New Hampshire lake. On the day before the bass season opened, he and his father were fishing early in the evening, catching sunfish and perch with worms. Then he tied on a small silver lure and practiced casting. The lure struck the water and caused colored ripples in the sunset, then silver ripples as the moon rose over the lake. When his pole doubled over, he knew something huge was on the other end. His father watched with admiration as the boy skillfully worked the fish alongside the dock. Finally, he gingerly lifted the exhausted fish from the water. It was the largest one he had ever seen, but it was a bass. The boy and his father looked at the handsome fish, gills playing back and forth in the moonlight. The father lit a match and looked at his watch. It was 10 p.m., 2 hours before bass season opened. He looked at the fish and then at the boy. "You'll have to put it back, son," he said. "Dad," cried the boy. "There will be other fish," his father said. "Not as big as this one," cried the boy. He looked around the lake. No other fishermen or boats were anywhere around in the moonlight. He looked again at his father, and even though no one had seen them, nor could anyone ever know what time he caught the fish, the boy could tell by the clarity of his father's voice that the decision was not negotiable. He slowly worked the hook out of the lip of the huge bass and lowered it back into the black water. The creature swished its powerful body and disappeared. The boy suspected that he would never again see such a great fish, at least not in his arms. That was 34 years ago. Today, the boy is a successful architect in New York City. His father's cabin is still there, on the island in the middle of the lake. He takes his own sons and daughters fishing from the same dock. But he was also right. He never again caught such a magnificent fish as the one he landed that night long ago. But he does see that same fish again and again, every time when he comes up against the question of ethics. For as his father taught him, ethics are simple matters of right and wrong. It's only the practice of ethics that is difficult. Do we do what is right when no one is looking? Do we refuse to cut corners to get the design in on time? Or refuse to trade stocks based on information we know we're not supposed to have? We would if we were taught early in life to put the fish back when we were young. For we would have learned this essential truth, not about how we had a chance to beat the system and took it, but about how Dad taught us the right thing. And as a result, we were forever strengthened. It's a great story, isn't it? It's a great story of what I call the dig. And the dig in life is Dad's compelling character. And listen, guys, here's a hard truth. It's dirty. It's a dirty truth. It's down in the dirt kind of truth. And that's this: your sons will leave with what you have lived out in your home. That's the bottom line for guys. Dad's compelling character. Secondly, the set. Setting a son up in life. What's the set? It's Dad's clear instruction. Stephen Covey, in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, mentioned that one of the essential habits of life for successful people is that they begin any enterprise with the end in mind. Every dad should ask this question: what essential information do I want my son to leave home with at the end? We've mentioned this before, but as he drives away, and you've shaken his hand or hugged his neck and said, "Son, be a man," and now his car is disappearing over the horizon, what does he leave home with? That's the end. And every strategic dad begins his interaction with his son with that end in mind. And so, what are the things that you want to have your son leave home with that gives weight and substance and strategic value to his life? Certainly we want good memories of fun activities. But guys, I want to tell you, there's got to be more than that. A strategic dad asks these questions: what do I want my son to leave home with concerning information about manhood or about his role with a woman? Does he understand that? Or about money? Or about particular social skills, whether it's just in life in general with a woman in particular? How to work? Have I taught him how to work? How to be on time? How to clean up his room? How to get up for himself and take initiative in life? What does he know about God that I imparted into his life? What does he know about sex that I imparted into his life, or about life in general? Every time Dad gives some clear, hands-on instruction about life, here's what he does for that son. He sets him at the net. He sets him up for success. It's called the set. And then finally, there's the spike. And I'm going to call the spike Dad's creative ceremonies for his sons, which we'll spend a lot of time on here this morning, which I think are done by the dad for his son to mark his progress towards manhood. It's the moment where not only does he set him up in life, but he kind of drives the principle home about what it means to be a man and how that son is making progress towards manhood. You know, one of the things that I'd love to do in men's fraternity for men across the country is bring back the power of ceremony. It's been lost today. I've asked the question to audiences all across the country: when is it that you became a man, and how did you know? It's a good question. I remember asking a businessman the other day on the plane that question. And at the end of our conversation, he told me, he said, I would have loved to have had a moment where I knew I had been commissioned into manhood. Just a moment. And I call that the power of ceremonies. You know, as a pastor, I get to do ceremonies all the time of different kinds. Just this last Sunday night, I did a ceremony called baptism, which is a ceremony marking a change in life from a person from a life lived by themselves without God to living with God. It just kind of marks that moment. Some of the ceremonies that we've done here at the church for different events have been very elaborate. Some have been absolutely hilarious. Even some that weren't so supposed to be funny, like a wedding that I did a number of years ago where we were down here, and it was one of those huge formal weddings, where, almost an uncontrollable budget as far as the amount of money that was spent on this wedding. And right here at this end was, at the end, as everybody marched out with the processional at the end, or the recessional, I should say, was the last groomsman. And down here was the last bridesmaid. Now, this bridesmaid down on this end looked like she weighed about 95 pounds. She was the most feminine, soft, small individual of the whole wedding. And down here was this pretty big, burly guy, and he was supposed to usher her out. Only problem is he had locked his legs through the whole ceremony. And it was just a little bit warm. And after everybody was out and we were just about to clap at the end of the wedding, he came to get her. And as he started coming here, I could tell he was white as a sheet and his glasses were down on his nose. And his eyeballs were rolled back into his head. And suddenly, as he was walking towards her, he started leaning forward, and then he just started running. And she was here with her little bouquet, 95 pounds, waiting for him. And she was paralyzed, and he got faster and faster, and then he hit her like a linebacker, right up under the chin, and put her right up over the first row, and her legs were sticking out. Some ceremonies are hilarious like that. But let me tell you, they're all powerful. They all have a unique communication to them, because that's the whole essence of a ceremony. A ceremony is a sacred seal about something. It seals, in a way that few things can, a change in life. And because of the investment of time and attention and money in it, it creates importance and an unforgettable memory. That's what ceremonies are all about. I remember reading a book by George Duby on knights. And it was said that when a young man came to that moment after all his training, where he kneeled before the king and he felt the blade on his shoulders knighting him, Duby makes this comment. He said, when a young man was dubbed, it was the finest moment of his life. It was the ceremony in which he knew, without a doubt, he had passed over into a new stage of life. Did you know every boy needs that moment? He needs to know that he's coming over the bar into a new stage called manhood. How does he get there? How does he get there in America today? Did you know there is no moment unless a strategic dad makes the moment? I want to give you just real briefly 5 characteristics of memorable ceremonies so that you can have this, and then we'll talk about doing manhood ceremonies with sons. Here are the 5 characteristics of memorable ceremonies. First, memorable ceremonies are costly. They're costly. The more time, the more thought, the more planning, the more cost, the better. That just goes part and parcel. One goes with the other. The more you invest in it, the grander it is, the greater memory it makes. Secondly, memorable ceremonies always ascribe value to the person being celebrated. The fact that you would take the time to go to their wedding, or take the time to show up at their baptism, or take the time to come to their graduation, that's what makes it meaningful. It ascribes value to the person being celebrated. You've created this ceremony in which, by being there with them and going through this enterprise, you're telling that person, you're important. That's why I came. This moment is important. That's why I came. And the circumstances are worth taking the time to ascribe value in this moment to your life. Thirdly, memorable ceremonies always employ symbols. Have you noticed that? Weddings have rings. Graduation is symbolized with a cap and gown and a diploma. When a man is promoted in the military, he gets gold bars. When retirement comes, he gets some gift. We've all often called it the gold watch. But it's a symbol to remind them of this unforgettable moment. I mentioned to you about the anniversaries that I like to make memories with my wife. And our 20th wedding anniversary is one of the most memorable. And the reason it's one of the most memorable is because of the diamond necklace she wears around her neck. That cost me a lot. But it made an unforgettable moment that she remembers because it's symbolized every time she puts that necklace around her neck. All great memorable ceremonies employ symbols. Fourthly, memorable ceremonies involve others who are significant to the person being celebrated. The old adage, the more the merrier, applies here. When my daughter was being inducted into the who's who of colleges and universities, it was a ceremony midweek, and she told us we didn't need to come. But it was interesting when we actually went and surprised her with our presence there that the head of the department, the English department, had showed up. We were there, some friends were there. And though the ceremony was simple, and there were a few students who were there all by themselves, it felt so much different when they were inducted than when my daughter was inducted with all the significant others in her life there with her. Because it gives such value to the person in the moment. And then lastly, memorable ceremonies always empower a life with vision. A wedding ceremony empowers a life with a vision of one rather than two. You don't ever see a guy after a wedding, he's walked out, he's standing out there after the wedding has taken place, turn to his friend and say, "Does this mean I can't date?" That wouldn't make any sense, would it? Or if it did, it'd be tragic. But the point is in the wedding, he understands that he gave his life away. And that what this means is I've entered a whole new lifestyle where the goal is two becoming one. Not one still shopping around for more. The same way when you have a fraternity initiation, it says we've changed. You've got a whole new social group that you're committed to. Or a graduation envisions the fact that no longer are you going to be dependent on mom and dad and having them pay tuition and things like that for your college. You're on your own now. You got to get a job. You have to work. It's the same way with a manhood ceremony. A manhood ceremony of different kinds says to the son, you're entering a new stage of life. That new stage has some new responsibilities attached to it. It envisions for you a new way of thinking and relating, and we're expecting that of you, this community of men. That's what a manhood ceremony is all about. Now, having said that, let me say a little bit more about how we got to the manhood ceremonies I want to present to you, because I just want to share with you, not a theory, I want to share with you what I've done. A number of years ago, 2 other dads and myself were sitting around. We had 7 sons between us, and they were all little rugrats at the time. And on one particular evening, one of the wives said to us 3 dads, "How are you going to raise these boys into men?" It was just a simple question, but it led to a late night discussion, because the truth of the matter is we didn't know how we were going to do that. There was no model, there was no understanding of how to do that. First off, we didn't have any definition of manhood we can impart to our sons, much less a process of manhood. There was nothing known. When we began to look for books and things like that, there was really nothing out there. And so that led to a search that ultimately led to a definition that I gave to you guys just a few weeks ago. What I want to add to that here this morning is a process that we came up with as well. Just to get you started, just to get you thinking. I'm not going to ask you to replicate this necessarily, but it'll give you a model at least you can play off of. Because a few summers later, I was over in Europe on a missions trip in Poland, and part of that time we had to kind of explore that magnificent country, and we went to different castles and that are there in the country, and I began to be interested in castles and knights and medieval times and began to read on it. And lo and behold, what I discovered is that knighthood is a lot like a process to manhood. And you could draw some of the same common themes between the two, because knighthood was a process, not a birthright. Just like manhood is a process, not a birthright. I mean, to be a knight, you had to go through some rudimentary beginnings as a page and just be basically a servant. Then you went through a time where you learned disciplines as a squire. Then there came this moment where you had proven yourself to be worthy of being knighted, and so there came this incredible moment where you became a knight. You were dubbed a knight. And then after that, most knights, in order to fulfill their calling as a knight, had to attach themselves to some noble ambition, and that varied from knight to knight, to complete their knighthood. So there was this process, and as I read that, I thought, you know, quite frankly, raising boys is a lot like that. There is a page stage before they're teenagers, just kind of where they need to hear just some basics. And there comes a place where they need to learn disciplines. There's a squire stage. And then there's a time where they need to know they've become a man. They need to be knighted. And then after that, there's a time in which they need to be encouraged to take on a noble calling, and that needs to be ceremonialized as well. So I began to play with that definition, and put those together. The second thing about knighthood that really fascinated me was knighthood was a high calling in an evil age. If you think about it, knights came out of which age? The Dark Ages. And they became, quote, the knight in shining armor for a reason. What they were is that they were the few men who lived above the age. They stood out. They stood out in valor, in courage, in nobility, in standards, in morality, and they were the ones looked at as the heroes of the age. And I thought, you know, that's what real manhood should be about. Real men, authentic men, should stand above this age too. And so how do you raise your sons to get there? Where they're living not just as a good businessman, but they stand out in their character, in their calling, in their involvements, in their investments. Sons don't get there by accident. See, we think they're just going to kind of get there. They don't. A strategic father knows there needs to be a process along the way to point them to that high calling. So, with that said, what we did is we came up with 4 ceremonies to help sons kind of process along the way. Let me just talk you through those 4 ceremonies. You've got them basically on your outline. I just want to mention them to you real quickly, but I think it'll help you get a sense of what we did. First of all, we had what we call the page ceremony of puberty. You know, there comes a moment, if you think about a son's life, there's a moment where he crosses over into a change of life at about 13 or 14. A page was a young boy between 7 and 13 and 14. So there comes a moment where he needs to be introduced, just like a page, into the rudimentary elements of manhood. And here's what we do, or here's what we've done to all of them. Leading up to their 13th birthday, we took time to meet with our sons in the morning, just the dad and the son, to take them through some basics of the new stage they were about to enter into, these teenage years. And the asset that we used, I think there, quite frankly, might even be better assets today. I'm just going to show you the one that we used, was the tape series here by James Dobson, Preparing for Adolescence. All that was 7 tapes, and we would get up early in the morning with our son, go out into a quiet place, and just put the tape on and listen to it. And it would talk about emotions and changes in your body. And it would talk about friendships and peer pressure and the things that a teenager is going to face. And we would just listen to the tape, and at the end of the tape, we would enjoy a conversation about that subject. And of course, one of the subjects there is about sex, which is a wonderful way to introduce you into that discussion. And then we'd go out to breakfast. And we would do that, and at least in my case, with my two boys, I timed it to finish about the time their 13th birthday was to occur. And so we finished the tape series. Then on their 13th birthday, I had a ceremonial supper just between me and my son, where we went out, and on that particular occasion, as we sat there together enjoying a dinner together, we talked about what it was going to mean to become a man. And I introduced my sons for the first time to the definition of manhood that you've received. And we just talked about it, just like we're talking about a subject. And I had Garrett and Mason memorize that definition of what it meant to be a man. And I said, son, here's what I want you to know. From this point on, we're going to talk about manhood within these 4 quadrants. About rejecting passivity, about accepting responsibility, about leading courageously and believing it all for God's greater reward. We're going to talk with that language. And what I want you to know is you can hold me accountable to every one of these things. And I'm going to hold you accountable. And we're going to march together in lockstep. So we do that. And in order to kind of memorialize that moment, I thought of something I could give them as a symbol of that moment. In the case of my older son, Garrett, I gave him an autographed picture of Larry Bird that Larry Bird had signed. And the reason is because when he was a young boy, we watched the Lakers and the Celtics every Sunday afternoon. And he loved Larry Bird because of his tenacity. And I told him, I said, this is a good symbol of what it's going to take for you to become a man, this kind of tenacity. And that was kind of his symbol. In the case of Mason, I gave, because he loves gadgets, I gave him a gold compass. And that compass pointed a true north, and that true north for a man is manhood. And that was their little symbol. And then there in the restaurant, I reached across the table and I prayed for him. Laid my hands on him and just prayed for him. Prayed that I would be a dad worthy of him, and that he, over his lifetime, could become this kind of man. Now, that sounds like a simple thing, and it was a simple thing. But did you know we still talk about that evening? Just that simple thing and those processes to enter into this stage called puberty, or through this stage called puberty, into teenageville. Here's the second ceremony we did along the way. I call it the squire's ceremony of leaving home. On the time he was going to leave to go to college, after high school graduation, we had what I call a gathering of dads. We took that son out to dinner, an evening together. And during that evening, as we 3 dads sat around the table, we talked to the son about this new adventure he was going to embark on leaving home. And we each shared a fundamental principle about the next 4 years, because all of our sons have gone to college, and that is this. We had him think about his college graduation on that evening. And we shared about how we went to college, and we shared about the mistakes we made and the foolishnesses that we invested ourselves in that ended up with 0, and then the things that we did well. And then we pressed him on 3 points: that he would finish college with good grades, with good friends, and a robust spiritual life. Those were kind of the 3 swords we wanted him to fight with during that time. And we impressed that upon him. At that point, we shared with him the family crest that he saw hanging in our homes all these years. And I'll show a picture of the family crest here. This crest is in each of the 3 homes that we have. And there's a lot of imagery in here. I won't take you through all of it. Just simply to mention on the left side where there's that white space with the cross, we talk a lot about conventional manhood that we talked about in here. And we said you have to die to that. That's why there's a cross over it. If you look on the right side, that symbol on the right side should mean something to you, because you should have it on your rear view mirror. It's the definition of manhood. And then those 3 swords represent the 3 families and the truths that the men of this family would continually give their sons until they themselves became a man. And of course, we had imparted those truths, some of them, to that son that night in this leaving home kind of stage. Now, we have this big dinner. It's an elaborate dinner with the 3 dads, and when we finish, we all go to one of our homes where the wives and everybody, the daughters and the younger sons are all waiting, and we have just a party together. And at the end of that time, all of us gather around and put that son in the middle, and then everyone prays over him in order to commission him into this new season of life called college. That's the second ceremony. Then there's the third ceremony. And that third ceremony is what I call the night ceremony of college graduation. It's when he finishes college. And by God's grace, all of our sons have, and the few remaining will. But a night had this magical moment where he joined the round table. And so on this particular occasion, it's somewhat like the previous one. It's an elaborate dinner, except it's not just the dads who are at the dinner, it's the other sons who've become men. They join the dinner as well. And again, there are truths that are imparted on that particular evening. Wise words are spoken. And then at the end of that particular moment, there comes the moment this son has waited for because he's seen the others. And that is, we take a moment where he is given a gift. He opens it up. It's the same gift for every son. In it is a ring, this ring. And this ring is the family crest embossed within that ring. And when that ring goes on his finger, that's the moment. Because we welcome him into not just the community of men, but now he gets to join our round table in which to encourage the other sons who are yet to come. But in this moment, this becomes the dubbing. This becomes the moment he can look back on and say, this is the moment where these men, these significant others, not just my dad, but these significant others, ushered me into the community of men. And from this point on, they have told me that they're expecting greater things from me, a greater calling, a higher walk, a more noble walk with more noble standards. And they feel that. And let me tell you, you would feel that if you were there on that evening. And then lastly, we have what I call the oath ceremony at marriage. Remember I told you every night needed to have a calling? Well, these sons are going to have different callings, but one of the callings probably each one of them will concern marriage. And so we have one final ceremony, and it's at the rehearsal dinner of the marriage. And we've done this on a number of occasions. We've had wonderful weddings and stuff like that, whereas men, we've been able to participate. But on the evening, you always have this rehearsal where everybody's having this gala and sharing things. After their friends have shared, the three dads stand up with this son and his bride-to-be. And what we do in a public way is we tell this young man's story that we've been involved in since he was a pre-teenager. And things that we have admired about him. And things that we love about him. And his dad gets to share publicly again how much he loves his son and is proud of his son and the things that he's good at in front of this great host of friends and family. And then one of us tells kind of the story of growing into a man and rehearses that moment where he became a man. But at this point, we are there just to make one final statement about calling. Because the next day he's going to be married, and that's a noble calling. And we're expecting great things from him in that calling. But on this moment, in front of his friends, we want to remind him of something. And that is that he made a promise to us first, even before he's going to make a promise to this young lady. And that is, he promised us that he's going to reject passivity and accept responsibility and lead courageously and expect the greater reward, God's reward. He promised us, his men, his few, his very few, but his band of brothers, he promised us that he would do that for a lifetime. And we want him to know in front of friends and company that we're going to hold him to that, as well as this noble calling by which he's been called. Now, at that moment, what we present to him is this. He gets his own crest. And this is exactly what he gets, to hang in his home so that it'll sit there and remind him. It'll be that silent reminder, that symbol. The next day he'll get a ring, but on this night he gets a crest. And that crest is to remind him of this calling to manhood of which he's now a part of, and yet he still has to fulfill in his own dig, because he's got to dig now and dig deep. So these are the ceremonies that we perform with our sons in calling them. Now, you may say, gosh, that just overwhelms me. But here's what I want you to hear. These are just 4 moments along the way. We're talking about over maybe 20, 25 years. There are these 4 moments that any dad in this room could invest in a son. And let me tell you, it'll be some of the finest moments of your life if you do it. There are some of you here, as I've had after this particular session, who would come up to me and they'd say this to me. They'd say, gosh, I wish I'd have heard this 20 years ago. My son's 30 years old. What do I do now? Let me tell you, it's never too late. It's never too late. Now, you may not be able now to go back and do the kind of ceremonies that I've just talked about, but listen, there's a whole world of creativity out there. But wouldn't it be a wonderful thing, even with a 30 or 35-year-old son, for you as a dad to say, you know, I've never told my son, you're a man. So why not come up with a weekend, just you and your son? Go out and do something. Maybe it's a great sporting event, or maybe it's a little mini weekend just to be together where you share with him things that you've learned about life, but you give him the hand of manhood. And you say, son, I just want to recognize to you that you're a man, and I'm proud of you, and I love you. Just that moment could mean everything. Then there's some of you who've got little rugrats running around, and you don't need to employ all this stuff on them right now, but let me tell you, this is a great time to start thinking about how you're going to call them to manhood and to come up with some creative ceremonies of your own. I have been absolutely amazed at dads who've heard this talk. They have done ceremonies that have gone way beyond anything I just shared with you. Ours are fairly simple, to tell you the truth. We have guys who've taken their sons on these amazing wilderness adventures, and along the way, as they're walking through the woods, you know, all of a sudden, up ahead, granddad steps out of the woods and says, son, why don't you join me in the journey to manhood? Then they walk along the road, and all of a sudden, the guy's coach steps out of the woods that coached him, says, join me in the quest for manhood. Then some of his friends, and it becomes this elaborate celebration. They get to a cabin, and there's this feast set up where they celebrate that young guy into manhood. You can do all kinds of things. I just want you to encourage you to think about this. Men are not born. They're made. And somebody's got to get them there. And I want you guys to hear me say, we need, in this age, in this dark age in which we're living, we need knights. Guys who live above the age and point the way to others of a high and noble calling. Years ago, during this session, one of the guys who were sitting out there had just gotten married to a woman who had been divorced and had a 19-year-old son. So when Dale Kinsler married Jim Lee, he inherited a 19-year-old young man named Chris Lott. And he came up to me afterwards and he said, you know, I'd like to do something for him. I don't know anything about a blended family. This is going to be a new journey. And by the way, it was. There were a lot of digs. But as he continued to reach out to Chris and try to bridge that gap and the hurt of the past, Chris began to respond. And then later on, Dale Kinsler set up a fairly elaborate ceremony in the Ouachita Mountains to do with him and some other dads and their sons where they initiated them into manhood. They had a big campfire where they had the kids write down, you know, all the things of what it meant to be a boy and put it in an envelope and threw it in the fire. And then they talked about manhood and they took hikes and stuff. And then on the final night they came back and they presented them with a plaque that called them into manhood. And on it was 1 Corinthians 13:11. It says, when I was a child, used to think as a child, act like a child, reason as a child. But when I became a man, I gave up childish things. And they had a ceremony right there where Dale called Chris into manhood and said, I want you to join my legacy of manhood. It was a great, great weekend for them. Months later, on Father's Day, Dale received this letter from Chris Lott. I want to read you the letter. Dear Dale, I know I wasn't born your son, but by God's amazing grace, He has made 2 separate families one. And I thank Him every day for that. I want more than anything for you to know that I'm thankful for you. I'm thankful because you came along and loved my mom with all your heart. You changed her life and you changed mine. I know your legacy isn't over, but you have already started a legacy in me, whether you know it or not. In your life, you've taught me what it means to be a godly man, and I know I'm not finished learning. When I think of Dale Kinsler, I think of a man who deserves respect, a man of character, a man of integrity, a man you can trust, a man of his word, and a man who always has a story to tell. In all, when I think of you, I think of a man who is committed to God. I'll never forget our camping trip in the Ouachita Mountains when you affirmed me as a son and as a man. Someday, when and if I have a son, we'll go on a camping trip just like that. And then you and I can induct him into our legacy of manhood. Proverbs 22:1 says, a good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver and gold. And Dale, with much prayer and consideration, it is my wish to honor you on Father's Day by taking on your last name as mine and carrying on your legacy in my life. With much appreciation, your son, Chris Kinsler. What do you call that, guys? Let me tell you what you call that. Dig, set, spike. That's what you call it. Now let me encourage you, as we finish here this morning, to initiate your sons into manhood. And here's what I want you to do. Guys, be creative. Be creative in every way you can. Some of you guys are saying, boy, I need some more information. Can I recommend to you my book, Raising a Modern Day Knight? Some of you know about that, some of you don't. But I would really encourage you, if you want more information and you want to see some other dads' ceremonies, they're all in this book. It's a very simple book. Any guy can read it. But I think it will give you some wonderful information about raising your son into being an authentic man. So be creative. And lastly, just know this. Your son will love it. Those moments between you and him where you're extending the offer of manhood. Let me tell you what it's going to be for those men, those young guys. It will be the finest days of their life.
Can you open that door? Uh, what do you think? I want to hear what your son said. I really want to know what your son thinks. Welcome, Mom. Good, we are finishing a lesson here. 5 or so minutes. That's okay. Cohen, what did you hear about this lesson? What did you like? So look at page 77. If you would think through the whole lesson, what was the most exciting thing you had? How about that? What did you hear that was most impactful? Yep. This whole lesson has to do with being intentional. So you, daddy, you're intentional in growing your son. And your son, you're intentional about getting there, getting where your daddy is taking you. And the imagery of a knight. See, knights were shining characters coming out of a dark period. The days we are in are dark. There's a lot of mess. We need a lot of to dig ourselves out of the dark that is in our world. We need to dig ourselves. So, I had being intentional in raising our sons to stand out. And I also had sons really becoming decisive in getting there. So there are some questions there that are a little personal. How have you helped your son measure his progress to manhood? Just ponder over that. And son, ponder over how you have received whatever your father has to give you. This lesson was really a reflection. It was really a waking up. In fact, I would recommend you guys, I'm gonna buy it for myself too, Raising a Modern Day Knight by Robert Lewis. Because if you can utilize that book and impact this young man as he go on to what, to 13? Look at the chart there, Martin. I think you're at a great place. The 4 ceremonies could actually, they are relevant to him because he's not 13 yet. Page 76, after the story that Robert gave about the 4 ceremonies, there will be a Martin's story. And he would call his son into knighthood. And at the age of 13, anywhere 13 to 14, as he really get into puberty, hey, prepare him. Find out what you can use. They used the Dobson tips. Find out what you can use. I like the way you guys go hiking. I've seen you sometime on Facebook in strange places in the world. That's good. But I'm just saying about being intentional much more to taking him really into manhood. Let him be a man that is going to actually take these things, these 4 things that were mentioned on page 77 in the ceremony that will be the final one where Cowan, you'll be becoming a man, getting married in church. That time your daddy could say, we've done it, son. We're calling you now to nobility, to reject passivity, accept responsibility, lead courageously, and expect a greater reward, God's reward. That's what I would say to you. I don't know who to call me on 3-1. I don't know. But call him later. So what could you do over the next year to initiate your son into manhood? I'm gonna say not in the next year, but from this age of puberty all the way to the time he get married. That's a period. And I have sons too. From this point now until they get married, I'll be much more intentional. I've been doing this lesson, but today, just being asked, I had to think about myself seriously as a father. I'm gonna close so that we can go to Bible study. Any final thoughts? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, great. I give God all the glory. It's 6:15 time for Bible study, but I hey, go for it. Go for it. And to God be the glory. When you get there, we will all be very happy. Let me wind up this lesson so that we can prepare for Bible study.